Any summary, quick summary where we left yesterday? Anyone? Do anyone wants to share something where we left yesterday?
Prabhupada was instructing the students there about the tilak and also the sacred thread and the spiritual master.
And
he was still trying to raise the funds to open up the temple still, but wasn't having much luck with pretty much anybody he contacted. Was telling him, no, can't do it. We don't have the money to do it right now, or it doesn't make sense to do it in America.
And what else? Yesterday we read that finally one success he had. He has his own place now. Even though it's a tiny office, there are no facilities, but at least he's free to preach something now. He's not under obligation of anyone else. Such a daring coming in visa, Prabhupada had, no one can do it, right? Taking this no money and taking this rental. Preaching. So actually the actual preaching has begun now to people. So you remember when he was preaching about the thread, the sacred thread, about, so people are thinking, they're speculating, maybe it's something kind of Hindu stuff you have to do. Yeah, the Swami is wearing one of those threads on his body, but that's for Hindus and it doesn't meant for Americans. Doesn't mean that Americans should wear them, but these Hindu beliefs are interesting, right? That's the mindset people had at the new. I think we need to do here, right? I'll start from here. Actually, Prabhupada has no motive but to present the absolute truth, as he has heard it in disciplic succession. But if anyone in that railroad car-shaped room were to ask himself, should I surrender to a spiritual master? He would be confronted by the existential presence of a genuine guru. One is free to regard his talk as one likes. In every step of one's life, the spiritual master guides. Now, to give such guidance, a spiritual master should also be a very perfect man. Otherwise, how can he guide? Now, here Arjuna knows that Sri Krishna is the perfect person. So therefore, he is accepting him. Sisyaste ham swadimam tam prapannam. Sanskrit. No one knows a word of it, but there is never any question for Srila Prabhupada. Even if they don't understand it, the transcendental sound of Shastra will purify them. It is his authority, and he cannot omit it. And even at first impression, it presents an air of scholarly authority, the original, though foreign words of the sages. I am just surrendering unto you, and you accept me as your disciple. Arjuna says, friendly talks cannot make a solution to perplexity. Friendly talks may be going on for years together, but no solution. So here Arjuna accepts Krishna as the spiritual master. This means that whatever Krishna will decide, he has to accept it. One cannot deny the order of the spiritual master. Therefore, one has to select a spiritual master by whose orders one will not commit a mistake. Suppose you accept the wrong person as spiritual master and he guides you wrongly, then your whole life is spoiled. No one has to accept a spiritual master whose guidance will make one's life perfect. So one has to accept a spiritual master whose guidance will make one's life perfect. That is the relationship between spiritual master and disciple. It is not a formality. It is a great responsibility both for the disciple and for the spiritual master. And yes, so this is the real transformation of heart. Means the inquiry is there, inquiry and answering. Already relationship is there now. The disciples have come, they're trying to learn, experience what it is, and Prabhupada is telling importance of spiritual master. So this is what is called, even though it is not bona fide way, but still he already has taken the position of a spiritual master, guiding the students, that just as Arjuna has accepted. Once you accept that spiritual master, there's no question of not obeying him. That means whatever Krishna will dictate, he has to accept. Guru Mukha Padma Vakya Chittete Kori Vakya. That's the relationship. It's not that I like, I don't like. So Prabhupada is giving example of Krishna Arjuna. He's educating his, the future to be disciples. That, that's the relationship between. And is there a choice? No, everyone must take a spiritual master. It's not an option actually. On the other hand, if we make loose decision in deciding who is spiritual master, if spiritual master is not perfect, then whole life will be spoiled. So one has to accept a spiritual master whose guidance will make one's life perfect. So this is, and even the Sanskrit they do not know, but the Sanskrit words itself is very purifying. So it's very convincing, it's purifying so people can understand even though they don't understand the meaning many times. So yeah, Cyclone Prabhu you can do.
Student, but if the disciple is in ignorance before. Prabhupada, yes. Prabhupada acknowledges a serious question. It is for answering questions like this from disciples in ignorance that he has left retirement in India and come to America. Student, how does he know which master to choose? Because he doesn't have the knowledge to make a wise decision. Prabhupada, yes. So the first thing is that one should be searching after a spiritual master, just as you search after some school. You must at least have some preliminary knowledge of what a school is. You can't search for a school and go to a cloth shop. If you are so ignorant, then you do not know what is a school and what is a cloth shop. Then it is very difficult for you. You must know at least what a school is. So that knowledge is like this. Tad vignartham sa gurum iva bigachet samit pani shrotriyam brahmanishtam. According to these words, the spiritual master is required for a person who is inquisitive about transcendental knowledge. There is another verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Tasmat Gurum Prapadyeta Jignashu Shreya Uttamam. One should search after a spiritual master if one is inquisitive about transcendental subject matters. Unless one is at least conversant with preliminary knowledge of transcendental matters, how can he inquire from the spiritual master? This questioner seems satisfied. The lecture is not a prepared speech on a specific subject, through grave and thorough in scholarship. It ranges over several philosophical points, yet he never pauses groping for words. He knows exactly what he wants to say, and it is only a question of how much his audience can take. So here a student asks Prabhupada about how does the student know which spiritual master he should choose? And whenever a student asks a good question, Prabhupada acknowledges those questions, and here he explains that a student who is searching for a spiritual master, he should know what he's looking for. He gives an example that similarly, if a student who wants to go to a college, he needs to have some preliminary knowledge of a college. What it provides. He can't be searching for a college and go to a shop. So that means the student is ignorant. And according to the scriptures, it is said that a person who is inquisitive about self-realization, about transcendental subject matters, he should search for a spiritual master. The person who asked the question, he seems satisfied. And Prabhupada's lecture was not a prepared speech on a specific subject. Depending upon the questions, he would speak about it, and he would never be stopping or pausing or thinking for words. He knows exactly what he wants to say. It is how much the audience can take.
But sometimes his mood is light and he commiserates with his fellow New Yorkers, chuckling about the difficulties they share. Suppose there is a heavy snowfall, the whole New York City is flooded with snow, and you are all put into inconvenience. That is a sort of suffering, but you have no control over it. Sometimes he praises Dr. Mishra's students for having learned so nicely from their teacher. Now, what Dr. Mishra is teaching is very nice. He is teaching that, first of all, you must know who am I. That is very good. But that who am I can be known from Bhagavad Gita also. I am not this body. And sometimes a guest suddenly speaks out with an irrelevant question, and the Swami patiently tries to consider it. Yet, behind his tolerance, Prabhupada's mood is always one of urgency. Sometimes he talks quickly, and one senses his desire to establish Krishna consciousness in the West as soon as possible. He has no followers, only a few books, no temples, and he openly states that he is racing against time. I am an old man. I could leave at any time. So, behind the formal delivery of Krishna conscious philosophy is an anxiety, an almost desperate desire to convince at least one soul to take up Krishna consciousness immediately. Um, Here, Prabhupada discuss with those guys, and he shares their difficulties, and he says if there is a lot of snowfall, then whole New York City is flooded with the snow, then that is also a kind of sort of suffering, and we can't do anything. We don't have any control over it. He says Dr. Mishra students were learning from him so nicely, and he says Dr. Mishra was teaching nice. He says we must know who first. We must know who am I. That is a good question, but he says we can get the correct answer from Bhagavad Gita. That I am not this body. I am the soul, and some disciples ask irrelevant questions, but Prabhupada handles it with very patience, and sometimes Prabhupada's mood looks like very in urgent mood. That means he talks so quickly. He's having such an anxiety to establish the Krishna consciousness in the West as soon as possible. He says, "I'm old man. I don't know when I leave my body. I want to convince at least one person to take up Krishna conscious before I leave."
Thank you. AJ?
Starting with now the constrained.
Yes.
Now the constrained situations of Butler and the Ananda Ashram and Dr. Mishra are behind him. He is free to speak about the absolute truth in full. Throughout his life, he has prepared for this, yet he is still discovering the best ways to present Krishna, exploring his Western audience, testing their reactions. We should always remember that he is God. He is all-powerful. In strength, no one could conquer him. In beauty, as far as beauty is concerned, when he was on the battlefield, have any of you seen a picture of Krishna? Have any of you seen Krishna? Oh, no. Prabhupada's voice fades and he pauses, looking out at his audience. No one has ever seen Krishna. None of them have the slightest previous knowledge of Lord Krishna. In India, hundreds of millions worship Lord Krishna daily as the eternal form of all beauty and truth and view his graceful form in sculpture, painting, and dance. His philosophical teachings in the Bhagavad Gita are all famous, and Prabhupada is his intimate emissary. Yet the ladies and gentlemen in room 307 look back at Swami blankly. Prabhupada is discussing the real meaning of going to a sacred place in India. One should go to a sacred place in order to find some intelligent scholar and spiritual knowledge living there and make association with him. Just like my residence at Vrindavana. So at Vrindavan, there are many big scholars and saintly persons living. So one should go to such holy places, not simply to take a bath in the water. One must be intelligent enough to find some spiritually advanced man living there and take instruction from him and be benefited by that. If a man has attachment for going to a place of pilgrimage to take a bath, but has no attraction for hearing from learned people there, he is considered to be an ass. Sa eva gokara means cow, and kara means ass. So the whole civilization is moving like a civilization of cows and asses. Everyone is identifying with the body. Yes, you want to speak? Yeah. So, like it's at the beginning, it's talking about how Prabhupada's still trying to balance, kind of his experience in, the culture in India versus the culture in America in terms of just how people react to things and what they know and what they don't know. And he starts off and he's just talking about, Krishna's opulence and just his, even just his physical form and his, the beauty of Krishna, and realizes that none of the people that he's talking to have ever seen a picture of Krishna or know what he looks like. And, just in relation to, or in comparison to India, where hundreds of millions, know all about Krishna and they see sculptures and paintings and understand the teachings from the Gita and all that, versus, these folks have no idea. And then Prabhupada goes into talking about kind of the importance of pilgrimages and going to sacred places, and gets into, that it shouldn't just be to go and experience the place or to take a bath or do something like that, but it should be, should be going there to learn, to find a guru or to find a learned person and serve them and, and learn what you can. And if you don't do that, you're just an ass apparently. So.
Yes. So the one thing, again, it was reinstated that there is no constraints now. He can speak completely free. Real things will come out. Those until now he was very much suppressed in different places because he was not allowed both the places. So finally he's really opening up. Prasanthi?
Women, in the places known as secret places, Prabhupada. Sacred? Yes. Women, is it sacred places? Prabhupada. Yes. Isn't it also a fact that there is more magnetism because of the meeting of saints and more advanced people? Oh yes, certainly, certainly. Therefore, the place itself has got some magnetism. Yes, and when, just like at Prabhupada, just like at Vrindavana, that is practical. Here, I'm now sitting in New York, the world's greatest city, such a magnificent city, but my heart is always hankering after that Vrindavana. Woman, yes, laughs. Prabhupada, yes, I'm not happy here. Woman, yes, I know. Prabhupada, I shall be very happy to return to my Vrindavana, that sacred place. But then, why are you here? Now, because it is my duty. I have brought some message for you people because I have been ordered by my superior, my spiritual master. Whatever you have learned, you should go to the Western countries and you must distribute this knowledge. So, in spite of all my difficulties, all my inconveniences, I am here because I am obliged by duty. If I go and sit down in Vrindavana, that will be good for my personal conveniences. I shall be very comfortable there and I will have no anxiety, nothing of the sort. But I have taken all the risks in this old age because I am duty bound. I am duty bound. So I have to execute my duty despite all my inconveniences. An outsider opens the door and hesitantly glances inside. Prabhupada, stopping his lecture, yes, yes, come in. You can come here. So, so one woman asks about the sacred places, and why they are powerful? Is it because of the saints and advanced people over there? Prabhupada replies that yes, that is certainly the case. And he also explains that he wants to always go to Vrindavana. His heart is hankering for it, but he is in this greatest city um, for, for them. And he also explains that it is the instruction of his spiritual master to preach Krishna consciousness. And in spite of all the difficulties and inconveniences, he's here. If he is in Vrindavana, he'll be very comfortable personally, but he is duty bound, and that's why he came to that city. And one outsider opens the door, and Prabhupada welcomes him to come in.
So he was very welcoming, as people one by one is coming. That's interesting how Krishna is sending sincerely. We will see what happens more. Prasanthi, then Pranath, you can read.
Hare Krishna. Robert Nelson was like a slow, simple country boy with a homespun manner, even though he had grown up in New York City. He was 20 years old. He wasn't part of the growing hippie movement. He didn't take marijuana or other drugs, and he didn't socialize much. He was a loner. He had gotten some technical education at Staten Island Community College and had tried his hand at the record manufacturing business, but without much success. He was interested in God and would attend various spiritual meetings around the city. So one night he wandered into the Yoga Society to hear Dr. Mishra's lecture, and there he saw Prabhupada for the first time. Robert Swami was sitting cross legged on a bench. There was a meeting, and Dr. Mishra was standing up before a group of people. There were about 50 people coming there, and he talked on I am consciousness. Dr. Mishra talked and then gave Swami a grand introduction with a big smile. Swamiji is here, he said, and he swings around and waves his hand for a big introduction. It was beautiful. This was after Dr. Mishra spoke for about an hour. The Swami didn't speak, he sang a song. Afterward, I went up to him. He had a big smile and he said that he likes young people to take to Krishna consciousness. He was very serious about it. He wanted all young people. So I thought that was very nice. It made sense. So I wanted to help. He stood there talking for about an hour. Mishra had a library in the back, and we looked at certain books, Arjuna, Krishna, chariots, and things. And then we walked around. We looked at some of the pictures of Swamis on the wall. By that time, it was getting very late, and Prabhupada said, come back the next day at 10 to his office downstairs. The next day, when Robert Nelson went to room 307, Prabhupada invited him in. The room was clearly not intended to serve as a living quarters. There was no toilet, shower, chair, bed, or telephone. The walls were painted a dark, dismal color. Prabhupada showed Robert the 3-volume set of Srimad Bhagavatam, which Robert purchased for 1650. Then Prabhupada handed him a small piece of paper with the Hare Krishna mantra printed on it. So Robert Nelson, who was from New York City and about 20 years of age, met. He had some technical education and tried his hand at a record manufacturing business, but was not successful. He was God conscious and attended various spiritual meetings. And one night he bumped into the Yoga Society to hear Dr. Mishra's lecture and met Prabhupada for the very first time. Robert is describing Prabhupada's, how he was talking, walking, and what he was doing. Prabhupada, basically, Dr. Mishra was giving a lecture there, and Prabhupada didn't talk much. He just did some kirtan. And then Prabhupada was telling Robert that people like him and more young people should take up to Krishna consciousness. And Robert really liked that point, and he wanted to help. Um, they looked at some of the pictures, in that room, and it's getting very late. And then Prabhupada asked him to come back the next day to meet him in his office. And then when Robert went, he was describing the condition of the room, um, and that it was very gloomy in there. And Prabhupada showed him the 3-set volume of Srimad Bhagavatam, which Robert purchased for 1650. And Prabhupada handed him a piece of paper with Hare Krishna on it. Prabhupada was very happy. Did I read that? He says on his face like he was handing me the world. Wow.
No, you didn't read that, but you can read.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, okay, Prabhu. Yeah, while Swamiji was handing it to me, he had this big smile on his face like he was handing me the world. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Go ahead, you can read.
We spent the whole day together. At one point, he said, "We are going to take a sleep." So he lay down there by his little desk, and so I said, "I am tired too." So I lay down at the other end of the room, and we rested. I just lay on the floor. It was the only place to do it. But he didn't rest that long, an hour and a half, I think. And we spent the rest of the day together. He was talking about Lord Chaitanya and the Lord's pastimes, and he showed me a small picture of Lord Chaitanya. Then he started talking about the devotees of Lord Chaitanya, Nityananda and Advaita. He had a picture of the 5 of them and the picture of his spiritual master. He said some things in Sanskrit and then he translated. It wasn't much of a room though. You'd be really disappointed if you saw it. Robert Nelson couldn't give Prabhupada the kind of assistance he needed. Lord Chaitanya states that a person has at his command 4 assets: his life, money, intelligence, and words, at least one of which he should give to the service of God. Robert Nelson did not seem able to give his whole life to Krishna consciousness. And as for money, he had very little. His intelligence was limited, and he spoke unimpressively. Nor did he have a wide range of friends or contacts among whom to speak. But he was affectionate toward the Swami, and out of 8 million people in the city, he practically the only one who showed personal interest in him and offered to help. From his experience in the record business, Mr. Robert, as Swamiji called him, developed a scheme to produce a record of Swamiji singing. People were always putting out albums with almost anything on them, he explained, and they would always make money, or at least break even. So it would be impossible to lose money. It was a way he thought he could help make the Swami known. He tried to convince Prabhupada of the idea, and Prabhupada didn't discourage Mr. Robert, who seemed eager to render the service.
So I was thinking how fortunate he is to spend the whole time, kind of whole day with Prabhupada that day. The place is that is described as like a really not suitable, but for him it's like heaven for Prabhupada, isn't it? At least he has his own place. So anyway, they both rested, and Prabhupada was always explaining about Panchatattva and everything. Everything is foreign. And Robert also, as we heard, he was spiritually inclined. So he couldn't, Prabhupada is asked, anyone can give in whatever way, ability. There has his command 4 assets: his life, kaya manasa diya vacha, his life, his money, intelligence, and words. It's whatever way one can render service. So he seems did not seem able to give his life to Krishna cause. Of course, it's a beginning. I don't know what's going to happen. So for me, he didn't have much money. So, but he was affectionate towards the Swami. Why? Out of 8 million people in the city, he was practically the only one showed personal interest in him and offered him, because he was a loner. He was genuinely looking for spiritual association, even though in this young age. And even though he's not fully convinced, but at least he found this touch and love by Prabhupada, who actually cared for him. When you read this one, Anna? in the record business. Yeah. From his experience in the record business, here he was part of the record business, which he didn't do well. So he said he developed a scheme to produce a record of Swamiji's song. This is very nice. People are always putting some albums, and most of them albums with almost anything on them. So I explained that he can make money, and at least it can help. Even if it doesn't make money, it'll help in spreading. So this he gave a good idea and suggestion. So Mr. Robert was seemed eager to render his service. That's very nice. That's one thing of coming to Krishna consciousness. We will, Swati Mataji.
Robert, me and Swami went around to this record company on 46th Street. We met there and I started talking, and the man was all business. He was all business and mean. They go together. So we went in there and with the tape and we tried talking to the man. Swami was talking, but the man said he couldn't put the tape out. I think he listened to the tape, but he wouldn't put it out. So we felt discouraged. But he didn't say much about it. Prabhupada had been in business in India, and he wasn't about to think that he could suddenly take up business in a foreign country on the advice of a young boy in New York City. Besides, he had come not to do business but to preach. Robert, however, was enthusiastically offered service. Perhaps he would become a regular brahmachari student, but he had a desire to serve Krishna. For Prabhupada, to refuse him would be perhaps to turn away an interested Western young person. Prabhupada had come to speak about Krishna, to present the chanting, and if Mr. Robert want to help by arranging for an American record album, then that was welcome.
Thank you. So here the attempt, Robert gave the idea. So they did some record and went to the business, but seems like he didn't accept it. So he says we felt discouraged, but he didn't say much about it. Both of them felt discouraged. Prabhupada didn't say no because he wanted to take the service what Robert is offering. That's what you want to see in one sense, right? That he encouraged the little sincerity which Robert was showing. That's the whole situation. Okay, who is next? Srikar?
Mr. Robert and the Swami made an odd combination. Prabhupada was elderly and dignified, a deep scholar of the Bhagavatam and the Sanskrit language, whereas Robert Nelson was artless even in Western culture and inept in worldly ways. Together they would walk, the Swami wearing his winter coat with its imitation fur collar, his Indian dhoti, and white pointed shoes. Mr. Robert wearing old khaki pants and an old coat. Prabhupada walked with rapid, determined strides, outpacing the lumbering, rambling, heavy-set boy who had befriended him. Mr. Robert was supposed to help Prabhupada in making presentation to businessmen and real estate men. Yet he himself was hardly a slick fellow, he was innocent. Robert. Once we went over to this big office building on 42nd Street, and we went in there. The rent was thousands of dollars for a whole floor. So I was standing there talking to the man, but I didn't understand how all this money would come. The Swami wanted a big place and I didn't know what to tell the man. Prabhupada wanted a big place, and a big place means a big price. He had no money and Robert Nelson had only his unemployment checks. Still, Prabhupada was interested. If he were to find a building, that would be a great step in his mission. And this was also another way of engaging Mr. Robert. Besides, Krishna might do anything, give anything, or work in any way, ordinary or miraculous. So Prabhupada had his reasoning and Mr. Robert had his. So here we see that when Srila Prabhupada and Robert Nelson's combination was little odd.
Robert, the building was between 6th and Broadway on 42nd Street, some place to open Krishna's temple. We went in and up to the second floor and saw the renting agent, and then we left. I think it was 5,000 a month or 10,000 a month. We got to a certain point and the money was too much, and then we left. When he brought up the prices, I figured we had better not. We had to stop. On another occasion, Robert Nelson took Prabhupada by bus to the Hotel Columbia at 70 West 46th Street. The hotel had a suite that Prabhupada looked at for possible use as a temple, but again, it was very expensive and there was no money. Sometimes Robert would make purchases for Prabhupada with the money from his unemployment checks. Once he bought orange color t-shirt. Once he went to Woolworths and bought kitchen pots and pans and some picture frames for Prabhupada's picture of Lord Chaitanya and his spiritual master. Robert, one time I wanted to know how to make chapati cakes. So Swami says, $100 please for the recipe. $100 please. So I went and got some money, but I couldn't get $100. But he showed me anyway. He taught me to cook and would always repeat, wash hands, and you should only eat with your right hand. So Prabhupada and Robert were...
You can finish the rest of this section.
Okay, Prabhupada. And whoever met the Swami was almost always impressed. They would start smiling back to him, and sometimes they would say funny things to each other that were nice. The Swami's English was very technical always. I mean, he had a big vocabulary, but sometimes people had a little trouble understanding him, and you had to help sometimes. So, Robert and Prabhupada were searching for a place to open Krishna's temple. So first they went for searching a building between 6th and Broadway on 42nd Street. But they met the renting agent also. And they said that the rent was about 5,000 or 10,000 a month. They were, it was too expensive. So they thought it would be better to stop. And the other day they went to Hotel Columbia at 70 West 46th Street. Even it was also too expensive and there was no money. And sometimes Robert would purchase for Prabhupada with his unemployment checks. And once he also bought orange color t-shirts. And he also bought some kitchen pots and pans, and even some picture frames of Lord Chaitanya and his spiritual master for Prabhupada. So once Robert asked Prabhupada to make chapati cakes, and Prabhupada was saying that, um, yeah, so he would ask for the recipe, and Prabhupada would be like, "You give me $100, please, so that I will teach the recipe." And Robert went to get some money, but he couldn't get $100. But still, Prabhupada taught Robert how to make chapatis. And while making, also, he taught that you should always wash hands and eat only with your right hand. And whoever met Swami, they were very impressed, and even they would start smiling back to him. And sometimes they would even say funny things um, and exchange things very, I mean, whatever conversations between them would be very nice. And even Prabhupada's English was very technical because he had a big vocabulary, and sometimes people would have trouble to understand him. And so Robert had to help to make each other understand their conversations.
Okay, thank you. Nipa?
Yes, Prabhu.
Yeah.
The Paradox at 64 East 7th Street on the Lower East Side was a restaurant dedicated to the philosophy of Georges Osawa and macrobiotic diet. It was a storefront below the street level with small dining tables placed around the candlelit room. The food was inexpensive and well reputed. Tea was served free, as much as you liked. More than just this restaurant, the Paradox was a center for spiritual and cultural interest, a meeting place reminiscent of the cafes of Greenwich Village or Paris in the 1920s. A person could spend the whole day at the Paradox without buying anything, and no one would complain. The crowd at the Paradox was a mystical congregation interested in teachings from the East. When news of the new Swami uptown at Dr. Mishra's reached the Paradox, the word spread quickly. Harvey Cohen and Bill Epstein were friends. Harvey was a freelance artist, and Bill worked at Paradox. After Harvey had been to Prabhupada's place at Dr. Mishra's yoga studio a few times, he came by the Paradox and began to describe all about the new Swami to Bill and other friends. Bill, I was working at the Paradox one night when Harvey came to me and said, I went to visit Mishra, and there's a new Swami there. He's really fantastic. Well, I was involved in macrobiotics and Buddhism, so at first I couldn't care less. But Harvey was a winning and warm personality, and he seemed interested in this. He said, why don't you come uptown? I would like you to see this. Should I continue, Prabhu? So I went to one of the lectures on 72nd Street. I walked in there and I could feel a certain presence from the Swami. He had a certain very concentrated, intense appearance. He looked pale and kind of weak. I guess he had just come here and he had been through a lot of things. He was sitting there chanting on his beads, which he carried in a little bead bag. One of Dr. Mishra's students was talking and he finally got around to introducing the Swami. He said, we are the moons to Swami's son. He introduced him in that way. The Swami got up and talked. I didn't know what to think about it. At that time, the only steps I had taken in regard to Indian teaching were through Ramakrishna. But this was the first time, to my knowledge, that Bhakti religion had come to America. So here it describes in the first paragraph about Paradox, which is on 64 East 7th Street on Lower East Side, uh, which is a restaurant which is philosophical of Georges Osawa, and it has a macrobiotic diet, and little food is inexpensive and well reputed. Tea was served free, and Paradox was basically the center for spiritual and cultural interest, a meeting place of reminiscent of the cafes. A person at Paradox could spend basically the whole day without buying anything and without complaining about it. Uh, Paradox was a mystical congregation which was interested in teachings. So when the news about Prabhupada came to Dr. Mishra's new Swami Mishra's speech to Paradox, the words quickly spread basically when Swamis came to America to Dr. Mishra's. And there are two people, Harvey Cohen and Bill Epstein. They were friends, and Harvey, who was a freelance artist, and Bill was working at Paradox, and Harvey had been to Prabhupada's place at Dr. Mishra, so he introduced about Swami to Bill, and Bill, as he was working at Paradox one night, he and Harvey came and said about his visit was fantastic. So Bill said, why don't you come? Am I right? And he said, interested. So he invited, why don't you come uptown? Am I right on that? It was Bill who invited Harvey. Harvey introduced to Bill and Bill invited, right? Why don't you come uptown?
Yeah, because Harvey has been coming before.
Yes. So, then Bill went to the 72nd Street and he walked there and could feel certain presence from the Swami. But that day, Swami looked pale and kind of weak, and he had been through a lot of things. He was sitting there chanting on his beats, and he said, one of the Mishra student was talking, finally got around and said he was the moons to the Swami's son, and he introduced in that way. Swami spoke later on. He didn't know what to say. At that time, the only step he had taken in regard to Indian teaching was through Ramakrishna, and this was the time knowledge and bhakti had come to America.
You're doing very good job in summarizing.
Oh, thank you. I'll keep improving. I'm not that good, but I'll keep trying.
No, you're doing excellent.
Thank you.
I was going to say real quick, I think it's interesting the parallel, if you go up a paragraph there, the parallel between Prabhupada's thoughts when he first met Bhaktisiddhanta, how he was like, I don't want to do this, a friend pulling him to meet this guy, he didn't want to do it.
Right.
It's a similar story for this guy as well. Like, I'm not really into this. I don't have time. I don't want to do this. It's not my thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, clearly was convinced otherwise.
Negations, yeah. Negative feelings, yes. I think that's most of the people are like that. So, did Vijayan Prabhu, you please read.
Bill Epstein, quite in contrast to Robert Nelson, was a dashing romantic person with long, wavy dark hair and a beard. He was good-looking and effervescent, and took upon himself a role of informing people at the restaurant of the city's spiritual news. Once he became interested in the new Swami, he made the Swami an ongoing topic of conversation at the restaurant. Bill. I went in the back and I asked Richard, the manager, I'm going to take some food to the Swami. You don't mind, do you? He said. No, take anything you want. So I took some brown rice and other stuff and I brought it up there. I went upstairs and I knocked on the door and there was no answer. I knocked again and I saw that the light was on it because it had a glass panel, and finally he answered. I was really scared because I never really accepted any teacher. He said, come in, sit down. We started talking and he said to me, the first thing that people do when they meet is to show each other love. They exchange names, they exchange something to eat. So he gave me a slice of apple and he showed me the tape recorder he had, probably for recording his chants. Then he said, have you ever chanted? I said, no, I haven't chanted before. So he played a chant and then he spoke to me some more. He said, you must come back. I said, well, if I come back, I will bring you some more food. James Green, a 30-year-old carpentry teacher at Cooper Union, was delving into Eastern philosophy. He lived on the same block as the Paradox and began hearing about Swami from Harvey Cohen and Bill Epstein while regularly taking his evening meal at the restaurant. James, it was really Harvey and Bill who got things going. I remember one evening at Mishra's in which Swamiji was only a presence but did not speak. Mishra's students seemed more into a bodily aspect of yoga. This seemed to be one of Swamiji's complaints. His room on 72nd Street was quite small. He was living in a fairly narrow room with a door on the one end. With the door on the one. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, one end here.
Yeah, door on the one end. Swamiji would set himself up along one side, and we were rather closely packed. It may have been no more than 8 feet wide, and it was rather dim. He sat on his thin mattress, and then we sat on the floor. So these passages describe like how different people like got introduced because of that. Everything started with that restaurant. So initially it was Bill. So basically, Bill was like a different kind of person. He was like a romantic, long and wavy dark hair. And after hearing about the new Swami, he played a like very important role of spreading the news of Swami's arrival, and he led that conversation at the restaurant. And also he requested his manager Richard, and he decided to take some food to the Swami, and he came to meet Swami with the brown dress. So he knocked on the door and he waited for some time. Then he started having a conversation with Swami, and also Prabhupada gave him a piece of apple, as well as he showed his tape recorder. And also they started having a conversation, and basically, so and he also told, like, as the people when they meet for the when they meet, they show each other the love and they exchange names and also have something to eat. Based on this, Prabhupada gave him a slice of apple, and he showed the tape recorder. As well as Prabhupada asked Prabhupada asked like whether he ever chanted, and he said he did not chanted. So Prabhupada played him the way he chanted the recordings, and also Bill told, like, next time when he comes there, he will bring like some more food. And there was like another character introduced, like James Green. He was like an carpentry teacher, and he was like delving to the Eastern philosophy, and he was also in the same block as the Paradox restaurant, and he began hearing from Harvey Cohen, and on having the Prabhu, I am getting a call actually, so yeah. Sorry, Prabhu.
I can do that. Okay. So, and Harvey. So, did we read this one? No, I think we can read. Yeah, James, you can read. Is it me? Anyone didn't read it? Mataji, is there Pranath Prabhu?
Yeah, Prabhuji, I'm here. I'll read.
Sorry, I missed you that time.
Okay, thank you very much. James, it was really Harvey and Bill who got things going. I remember one evening at Mishra's in which Swamiji was only a presence but did not speak. Mishra's students seemed more into the bodily aspect of yoga. This seemed to be one of Swamiji's complaints. His room on 72nd Street was quite small. He was living in a fairly narrow room with a door on the one end. Swamiji would set himself up along one side, and we were rather closely packed. It may have been no more than 8 feet wide, and it was rather dim. He sat on his thin mattress, and then we sat on the floor. We wouldn't chant. We would just come, and he would lecture. There was no direction other than the lecture on the Bhagavad Gita. I had read a lot of literature, and in my own shy way, I was looking for a master, I think. I have no aggression in me or go getting quality. I was really just a listener, and this seemed right, hearing the Bhagavad Gita. So I kept coming. It just seemed as if things would grow from there. More and more people began coming. Then it got crowded and he had to find another place. The new group from the Paradox was young and hip, in contrast to the older, more conservative uptown people who had been attending Prabhupada's classes. In those days, it was still unusual to see a person with long hair and a beard. And when such people started coming to Swami's meetings on the west side, some of the older people were alarmed. As one of them noted, Swami Bhaktivedanta began to pick up another kind of people. He picked them up at the Bowery or some attics, and they came with funny hats and gray blankets wrapped around themselves, and they startled me. David Allen, a 21-year-old seeker who came up from the Paradox, had just moved to the city, optimistically attracted by what he had read about experimentation with drugs. He saw the old group as a kind of fuzz-budgety group of older women on the west side, listening to Swami's lectures. So this all explains the programs in the beginning of the movement. It says how Prabhupada used to do the lectures in his room, where there was not much except the lecture on Bhagavad Gita, and people would just come. This is a narration by James. James says that he would just come and sit and listen to Prabhupada's lecture. And since he was very shy kind of person, he would just sit down, and he was not like, very aggressive, go-getter kind of person. And things slowly started changing when the younger generation started coming to Prabhupada's classes, and with the people with long hair and beard and all this different kind of get-ups. It was not something that was unusual at that time as well, and the older generation people were alarmed seeing those kind of people coming to Prabhupada's classes. But I think that kind of started becoming more and more from what I see here.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So here it says he got crowded. He had to go for another place. You also read this one, right? David Allen.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yeah.
David Allen, yeah, the younger gentleman, he started coming to Prabhupada. Yeah.
Very nice. Miracles are happening. You can finish
Yeah.
this also. This.
Okay, Prabhuji. David, we weren't known as hippies then, but it was strange for the people who had originally been attracted to him. It was different for them to relate to this new group. I think most of the teachers from India up to that time had older followers, and sometimes wealthy wisdoms would provide a source of income. But Swamiji changed right away to the younger, poorer group of people. The next thing that happened was that Bill Epstein and others began talking about how it would be better for the Swami to come downtown to the Lower East Side. Things were really happening down there, and somehow they weren't happening uptown. People downtown really needed him. Downtown was right. It was ripe. There was life down there. There was a lot of energy going around. So this,
Haribo.
Yeah, it looks like a epic shift from the one side of the town to the other side, and also from teaching to more older generation to the younger generation. Because like it says here, the downtown was more happening, the downtown had more life and more opportunities. It wasn't a typical teachings of swamis and swamis who usually come from India. They target, older people, wealthy people, but it was more, Prabhupada's target was more towards younger and poorer group of people.
Nice.
Yeah.
So inspiring to see. Didn't happen in India. AJ, you have any comment on this?
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah. So, again, this is a little before my time, obviously, but what they're saying is the Lower East Side was not a good place, is my understanding. It was a pretty horrible, crime-ridden, wild place at the time. So it's kind of crazy that these guys are like, no, this is the place for you to go. But I mean, in hindsight, they were right. Like these are the people that your message is going to resonate the most with. But I mean, I just think it's neat too, as you go through this, and I'm sure we'll see it more, and just in general, that a lot of these people, even early on, had the foresight to record a lot of these conversations. I mean, these are interviews, but earlier in the chapter, they show like essentially a transcript, and the fact that people realize the impact that Prabhupada was going to have and the importance of his words and his teachings so early on, and that they thought, hey, we need to keep this stuff. We need to memorialize these talks, and I mean that's pretty awesome. I mean, it's just I don't know. I think it's just crazy that they thought to do that then.
But remember this, I was thinking, how this is Krishna's plan, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's plan. I can see that, here the India is considered civilized spiritually. Okay, they did not take it. Now it comes to America. American people, even culturally, they are not considered very, very good, and rich everything they didn't take. And within the city also, you're saying that this lower side is very bad crowd, right? That's what I'm hearing. And the movement is, our movement is also the one who is, worst, he's most qualified for Krishna consciousness. That's all the songs we read. And whoever is most unqualified person, he gets bhakti. It's a totally contradictory to this age. In our calculation, in mundane calculation, so this man is good. He should be qualified. But no, the history also shows the great two people, Jagai and Madhai. We read it briefly in Chaitanya Charitamrita. They were so much fallen, full of sin, but they were very much qualified to practice bhakti.
Yeah, I mean, even kind of my introduction to bhakti was through a path similar to that, right? It wasn't from, it was essentially, I don't know if how far the book, well, it's past Prabhupada's life, but in the 80s, right? Like heavy metal bands, essentially, in New York, were meeting with devotees, and they began starting, Krishna conscious bands that would preach the, the bhakti message. And I mean, these were tattooed, scary guys. These were essentially, gang members and bikers and things like that took to this message, and the Krishna consciousness. So, it's wild that it goes that way, right? And it starts with these guys saying that to Prabhupada, saying, go to the Lower East Side, because this is the same place it was happening for these bands, was in the Lower East Side, is where they were, encountering these original devotees of Prabhupada, right? The original disciples in New York, and then preaching that message to kids, right? To young teenage guys like me, who are going to concerts and hearing the music, and and getting that little bit of, that seed, right? They're planting that seed of like, hey, here's what we're about. And, have you heard about this? Do you know Krishna? And it just then went from there. And now, guys like Raghunath, who that's how I know of Bhakti, is through his bands and things like that. So it's just a crazy path that it took.
Yes. It's amazing, how it's in digits, we will be spending time. We will not move to the next chapter today. We'll do tomorrow the next chapter, but we can have some of the reflections. Is how that any disease if you cure it's okay, but when the disease is very much severe, no one can cure it, and one particular medicine cures, then it really has its own potency. So basically, it shows that how Krishna consciousness is so powerful that even though one person is so low, so down into, even physical standards, material standard is so low, still he or she can be delivered by this process. This that shows. That's why it was inconceivable for Indian people to accept, because when somebody's bad habits, they are not considered to be suitable for spiritual practice, because this is he's hopeless. He's hopeless. So that's why most of the people couldn't understand what this miracle is happening. They had wrong impressions. They thought that in America, by the name of bhakti, they are doing all this, drug and everything for a long time. India picked up very recently. Otherwise, it had a very bad impressions on this movement. And any comments, reflections from this chapter? The chapter is again. Anyone guess the chapter?
Free to preach.
What? Mataji said something. Answer.
No, I was saying free to preach.
Free to preach, yes. Free to preach. So first time Prabhupada opened up with this. Yeah, free to preach. Very good. So any more reflections? We can take 2-3 minutes. Anyone want to share something? No? What did we discuss? We discussed, he has his own place. It's not finished. It's a very unusual place, but somehow or other he got connections. Who came today? Bill, right? Or Robert.
Robert.
So, yeah, Robert came, and he was a young boy. He didn't have the money, but he suggested he can have the record. But he bought the Srimad Bhagavatam. Robert and Prabhupada tried a lot to get a better place, actually. So he tried for then somehow the news spread to the Paradox, which is the restaurant where people, and in proper word, I think people hang out over there. They can stay whole day free, and restaurant was there. So somehow when the message went there, the people start spreading the words about the Swami. So one by one, they started coming, and the place was also getting, filled. And people are suggesting that, we should get a bigger place, or he should have come to the downtown instead of lower side. I really don't understand what is downtown and lower side, but just accepting. Any other comments?
Prabhu, that point where how happy Prabhupada felt when he gave that Bhagavatam to Rob Nelson, and he said, felt like the whole world, the world. It's how happy Prabhupada felt.
A big smile and this big,
yes,
inconceivable things. Anyone else? We can end one more. Dr. Mishra's place also helped a little bit, to build up the crowd and spreading the name, everything. Even the Dr. Mishra didn't help Prabhupada, didn't wanted him to grow. but that helped him to somehow build the connections, and they started coming. Very nice.
Many people from the Paradox restaurant, they started coming once they heard about this. They started coming to
Right.
God's lectures.
Yes. Yes. And Bill brought food for Prabhupada. That's nice thinking. And Bill actually helped in spreading the words about Prabhupada's presence there a lot as well. So it looks like Krishna has his own plans and to make it. Thank you so much. I want to thank you so much. We'll start tomorrow's chapter 17. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Prabhupada Lilamrita ki jai. Thank you so much. Good night.
Hare Krishna.
Krishna, have a good night.